The brief I was given by Revo was a description of how the consumer has come back to engage in place. I've titled it What the Hell Happened. Our PR agency signed off last week a lot swearier title, but I'm going to stay with What the Hell Happened and keep it positive with a focus on coming out of COVID with confidence. I think from my perspective, there's no point in blindless optimism. But we do have to look beyond the headlines. We're on the clock. I've got a 10-minute manifesto for you. As I said, the only way is to go beyond the headlines, and the only way to do that is to use data, good, solid, independent data. So here's my 10-minute manifesto, hopefully telling a story around that. I'm going to cover how we use the data, how we listen to the customer, things that we've always done in the past, but now are more important than ever in this sort of evolving world. And then just focusing on what the past has created. We've all seen the headlines. At the lowest, the mobility dropped to 32%. Now that's a very obvious headline. We know that through working with partners in footfall, working with partners in app data. It was a very, very stark headline throughout last year. But beyond the headlines, what the more important thing to focus on is, I guess, just a few key points that I'd really want to land well with you today. There are a couple of obvious ones there, and then one not so obvious. COVID has obviously changed the way, how we move. COVID has obviously transformed property value, but it's the middle one that I think a lot of the people in this room and the people upstairs don't often think about that much. Property value is tied to people in space. Offices need workers, homes need residents, and shoppers need customers. I've been in the industry for about 20 years, maybe slightly more, and I've lost count of the times that I've tried to get the point across, and to be fair, it landed about 5 years ago, that we're not selling space, we're selling the custom that walks by that space, and that's what we need to focus on even more as we evolve through the next couple of years. You need to understand change in a far deeper way than we have done in the past, and I really don't want this to sound like a Jerry Maguire manifesto, but now it really is the time to do things differently and more thoroughly. These four headlines here, yes, footfall's changed, the consumer behaviour's changed, the spend has changed, and the sentiment has changed. And it's now more important than ever that we go just below those headlines. So if we focus on the footfall headline, this is using app data movement that we use at asset level for various customers and store level in some instances, plotting last year and the various lockdowns. What you probably can't see, but I'm happy to distribute afterwards, is that this is split down by asset class. What we saw with the first lockdown was a very clear, everywhere got hit relatively uniformly, and then logically, the places that came out and succeeded after lockdown were the open air spaces, so the outlet centres, the retail parks, etc. And some of the town, city centres and covered malls were hit most. As we moved through August, obviously with Eat Out to Help Out, things bounced back more uniformly, and then through December, things got better before it got worse again. It's really important to point out that this data is available, it's available for everywhere. It's not like primary research data where you can only do it in your asset. People today are using this data to think about buying UK retail property again. Thinking on how we spend, obviously we have spent very, very differently on very different products throughout the pandemic, and obviously things flipped to online. I think a lot of time is being spent now focusing on how this will revert back in this period and beyond. This data, again, is available for any geography, any place. We really need to move beyond the sort of historical, let's get any data we can and shove it into a leasing brochure or put it into our plan, and think very carefully about the sound data we use. We and others have access to transactional spend data through banks and aggregators, and again, that can be bought for any location. A lot of you in the room today will be using that. So we need, when we're planning how we come through this reset, to use this sort of data to reframe the landscape. We've got to move away from the lazy sort of planning retail needs assessments using methodologies that just are no longer relevant, with the UK retail PLC being overspaced by about 30%. There's a lot of work needs to happen using solid data to get to what is right for every location. When I say UK retail is overspaced by about 30%, there are some places that are 50% overspaced, some that are balanced, and some that maybe need more space. It's not uniform at all, but you've got to use the data to understand what the opportunity is. I think it's important to point out that the shape of how we shop and how we spend has changed. You could have put this slide up 10 years ago. This happens all the time. Frequency has dropped, obviously, but average trip value has increased. Catering has been slower through certain periods after Eat Out to Help Out, and digital engagement has obviously grown. We need to move away from just these single negative headlines and, I guess, wake up and smell the coffee. If consumer behaviour is changing at such a rapid rate, we need to think about how that impacts all of our businesses. So what we provide as occupiers, what we provide as landlords and investors, and how we manage our relationships between the two. You may have seen last year CACI were one of the strongest proponents for changing the lease model and using data to provide that, what we call the new performance lease model. I won't go through any of it now, but the stands upstairs, if you want to come and talk to one of my colleagues about it. We've got one lease happened in the West End and 3 leases happening shortly in Europe, where it's beyond the traditional model and is using data to understand the value of that store, including halo and footfall, rather than just what goes through the till. I think when you think about consumers, the reality is that our values and motivations have shifted in that very short period. There's the obvious headlines around localism and convenience, but these have huge impacts on what your customers, what the consumers are doing every day. Now's the time to really think about it and apply yourselves accordingly. Unfortunately, a lot of marketing budgets and planning budgets got cut last year, understandably, but the refocus of that needs to be now. On to listening to the consumer. We used to be 5 days at work, then we were 5 days at home. Some of our latest research is 2.8 days a week in the office and 2.2 days at home, obviously a blend. The point I want to make here is that it's ever evolving, so you've got to monitor what's happening in your town, in your place, and understand and listen to the consumers and make the most of that opportunity. However, don't just think about office workers. 63% of workers are not desk-based. They're in services, they're in public services, they're people that haven't had too much of a lockdown when it comes to working from home. They've had to go and work in factories. So don't get overtaken by the rhetoric around the return to the office. Right, the final straight. I wanted to change this because my focus is on sort of the last 6 to 18 months. And I changed the title from what does the future hold to what has the past created. Contradicting myself, coming back to that sort of focus on how we travel to work. Obviously, there's been a shift in working patterns, which on the flip side means that we're at home a lot more, but it's not all bad. When you change the function of a place, the form will follow, the change in form will follow. What I mean by that is, if you believe the stats that I put on the previous slide, we might be in the office 40% less, but we're spending 15% more when we are in the office on each of those days. Conversely, when we're at home, we're using a lot more local facilities, and there's a lot of data behind this we can bring to life. I think just to focus finally on a couple of consumer segments, as it were, the old become young. This is a title is potentially slightly confusing. The point I really want to make is everyone's behaviours have changed. The young, and I won't use Gen Z or millennial or anything like that, but the young have become far more focused on sustainability. They've picked up values in localism and believing in the brand. And the old have been opened up to far more channels than they ever have been. I think 5 years ago, we wouldn't have worried about any kind of channel shift with an older demographic. Now it's absolutely here. You need to align your businesses accordingly. So, to end on a positive, thinking about the next 24 months from our perspective, it's very clear that Christmas is going to be a challenge still. We completely understand that. It's going to be tough, and that's notwithstanding the supply chain issues. The next sort of 18 months, frame your offer. It's a mandate in retail since God was a boy. Make sure you merchandise appropriately to your demographic, to your market. That's the case whether you're a retailer or a landlord. Make sure you line up your offer to that market. I think one of the most frequent conversations I had since Christmas was the reality, like it's some kind of mind-blowing experience, that most shopping centres, most covered malls were 60-70% clothing and footwear. The profile of what's in your pocket is more like 30% spend on clothing and footwear. So make sure you're aligned appropriately. And then in the future, plan for your future with an understanding of the growth of your key consumers. The Gen Z nomenclature absolutely are going to be a focus. Listen to them now, because they're going to be the biggest market in the future. You run the risk of failure without doing that. But I think the future does look far more positive as long as we're active and we're covering ourselves by looking at the solid data to make sure we plan accordingly. That's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks very much, Dan. I was interested in some of those slides about not all change is bad. I think if we'd been standing here about a year ago, we'd have said most of this change is as bad as it's ever got. But, that's a point of view. And I think the whole challenge around data is all the time that we invested in data and understanding customers and understanding businesses, everything's been blown apart. And how much of that is going to remain true as we move forward, which, of course, is the only way we can go, which is to go forward. I'd like to now introduce Theo Fafitis, who's going to come and talk to me a little bit about what he's experienced over the last year and also what he thinks is going to happen in the future. I mean, this is somebody who needs very little introduction from me, but is certainly in the real thick of it where retail's concerned. And I think it'll be really good to get, for all of our purposes, a really good view of how he sees things right in the eye of the storm. So, Theo, would you like to come and join me? Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
It's a pleasure.
Hello, everybody. Come on, we're awake. We are.
Now, the biggest challenge here is going to be not talking all afternoon and being called out on time, I think, for Theo and I.
I think we'll be thrown out.
Yes, I think we will. So, Theo, you've just listened to the stuff that Dan's shown there, and I'm sure none of that is a great surprise to you in terms of change behaviour. Could you just share with us a little bit about how your business has fared and how you're feeling at the moment?
I think you're right, Catherine. It's no surprise to me as a shopkeeper, and I'm sure it's no surprise to the new enlightened asset managers and property owners of shopping centres and shops. Look, we've been on this long journey, and I reckon it's about 15 years of being on this travelator where retail has been trying to find itself and see where it is evolving. And we've all been running and running, and we're getting faster and faster. Then we go from a little trot to a full gallop as we try to survive in the changing world of retail. And all I can give you as an example is, all of a sudden we're going from the only place you can buy a product is a shop to all of a sudden you can buy products elsewhere. And all us retailers really weren't sure how we were going to end up. And of course, then we had the online players come in. They didn't have any physical retail, and they started, and they were taking our lunch at much reduced costs. So we had to wake up. So we all started our online businesses. But we all had these estates, all these shops that we were committed to with contracts and leases. So we had to keep those going at the same time. And the biggest frustration that I had as a shopkeeper over the last 15 years was trying to get the owners of those malls and shops to understand that the world is changing. And unless they changed, one of us was going to go bust. So either going to be me or it's going to be them, because all the customers would go bust. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to happen. And it took COVID, really, to wake everybody up. I remember going to owner of a shopping centre and going to their offices to have a chat with them about our position, because a lot of our lunch was being taken from online players, and we needed some help within one of the brands. And I've got to say, I went to their offices, I was quite intimidated, because they were so plush, and I thought, how do these guys understand what's happening in the real world? They're living in these ivory towers. And after my meeting, I realized that they didn't have a clue. And that business doesn't exist anymore as a business. Their shopping centers do, but owned by other people. And the important thing about COVID, we have now understand that we need each other. That shopkeepers need the landlords, need the shopping center owners, and they need the shopkeeper.
And you think that balance of power shift is a good thing for the longer term of retail?
Well, it's sustainability. Look, I'll give you an example. If you've got a shopping centre in Plymouth, for instance, in a shopping centre in Plymouth, you're the only gig in town. So if a retailer wants to be there, they've got to pay the rent. All of a sudden, if somebody opens another shopping centre next to you, the present shopping centre owner will understand that's competition, and we're all fighting for the same pound. So we're going to have to sharpen our pencils and work together with our customers. Well, that's exactly what the internet has done. It's opened a shopping centre next to every other shopping centre, and it's taking pounds away from our physical retail, which we all love. And as a shopkeeper, that's where I want to do my business. But at the same time, I want to be profitable and sustainable. And if we think about online marketing as opposed to cost of being in the store, if as a shopkeeper I can buy a pound of turnover for 20p of marketing, or 25p of marketing, but it costs me 75p to buy the same pound in a retail environment, it's not hard to work out what's going to happen, is it? But things have changed. We've had an incredible response since COVID from loads of our landlords. Not all of them, but a vast majority who understand now what the tide has changed. And this last 18 months has accelerated people's perception by at least 5 years and understanding. And we're all to blame, because as shopkeepers, it was hard for us to make that decision of saying, I'm going to shut all my shops and trade online. We wouldn't take that gamble. But guess what? Somebody made that decision for us.
Yes.
And we shut our shops and just traded online and realized that we could just trade online. And that whole experiment showed also to our partners and landlords that actually we have to work together. And if it's whatever it is, and I'm making these numbers up, but the differential is quite close. It's 75p against 25p. Well, what's interestingly happened now, since the stores have opened again, and the online players who grew rapidly during COVID, as they've started to mature and compete with each other, the cost of acquiring that pound online has moved up and up and up, because the competition of pay-per-click and everything else. And also, because of some of the re-gearing of leases that we've managed to achieve with our partners on physical retail with turnover rents, the cost has gradually come down, and with rates reduction as well. Now the differential isn't as high. So it shows that physical retail is definitely here to stay. It isn't going anywhere, and we will have shops. We just got to remember we also have competition.
Absolutely. So that rebalancing has really been as a result of COVID, but it has to be for the good of all parties, doesn't it?
It is, and we have rebalanced, and we've modernised.
Yes.
And we've modernised. We can't work on systems that were, it's like the rates from 1500. For goodness sake, government, get a grip.
So on that point then, yesterday we've seen that Rachel Reeve has said, don't worry, if Labour get into power, we're going to get rid of business rates.
She also said for every drop of rain, a flower would grow.
Exactly. Exactly. She isn't quite sure yet, is she, what she's going to do instead. I mean, business rates is something both you and I have talked to the World and his wife about. But what's your sort of thoughts on these comments made by the politicians at the moment about it?
Well, I don't know. I don't particularly like any of them, to be perfectly frank. They're all blaggers. But at the end of the day, someone has actually got to do something about it. Now, on a positive front, Mr. Rishi actually did pull his finger out. So we've got to give him credit for that, recognise that we couldn't carry on, and this was an antiquated tax. It was going to kill shopkeepers and physical retail, and did what he did with the suspension of rates for a year and then the reduction that we've seen this year. He also said that he was going to announce a review this autumn,
Yes.
And we're waiting for it any minute now.
Could be now, whilst we're talking. Perhaps
It could be done any minute now. So the review's already been published, I think, the general information from the review, but the conclusion of his review. And it can only be that there has to be either a further temporary reduction in business rates until they totally work out what the replacement is, or, for all we know, those very clever people at the Treasury might have already worked out what the new tax take is going to be and how they're going to collect it. But certainly in the 1500s, there wasn't ye-old internet. You just can't carry on in the way that we carried on. So let's see what he comes out with.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Now, just moving off slightly, still using the lovely Chancellor, the furlough scheme ends, of course, right now. Tell me about labour shortages for you in retail and how furlough did or didn't work for you.
Furlough was brilliant, and without it, I wouldn't be sitting here as a shopkeeper. I've got to be honest, it would have been incredibly impossible to survive without that assistance. So we can moan and groan about everything else, but we have had a lot of help to get us to where we are today. So what I'm saying is we should not waste it. We should not waste the fact that we've got this chance and opportunity now to rebalance and go forward. And there's a great future for us going forward as physical retailers. We've only got a few people left on furlough at the moment, so it's going to make no difference whatsoever to us. But labour shortages, there's definitely inflation. And wage inflation, no question about wage inflation. But we're going to have to get used to that.
Yeah, I think so. And last night, the chairman of the Bank of England said he thought there was going to be a plague of locusts flying into the country on the back of the fuel shortages. He can't actually believe the number of things that are happening to us. How do you feel about this? You know, I look at it as you were saying, I've been talking about the fuel shortage and supply for the last week. It feels like the world's waking up, and you're a business
it's bleeding
that's
obvious.
Global, isn't it? Yeah,
I mean, we've known the minute we voted to leave the EU, we would have skill shortages in certain areas. Oh my God, Grant Shapps has just worked it out. Where has he been for the last 2.5 years? Has he been in that little, he's in the tiny little room, have you seen him on television? He's in this tiny little room with his book behind him.
And, turn forwards, always turn forwards.
And his ministerial case open, the red brief, showing how important it is. Oh, and a bit of a flag.
Yes.
For F's sake, we've known about shortage in HGV drivers for over 2.5 years. What have you done about it for the last 2.5 years? And the answer is sod all. Until it absolutely, oh shit, it's arrived, they've worked it out, I'm going to blame the media. Well, there definitely was no cause for people to be alarmed and be running down to the petrol stations. But the fact remains, they didn't do anything about it. And it's not just that. There's a whole raft of things that we all knew we would have to take care of when we left the EU. This deal was as oven-ready as a turkey that's still running around in a field. Right?
If there are any of those, Theo, they may not be ready either.
And Christmas trees, I'm told. Robert Dars will have some Christmas trees. But so, you know, there's a lot of work still to be done to get us ready or for us to carry on after Brexit. But we didn't do it. Now, you could say, oh, well, with distraction, we had COVID. Yes, we had COVID. But governments are there not to be distracted. They're there to do a job.
Do you think this government's listened to business, though? Because I think that this lack of understanding of the supply chain is particularly breathtaking.
Oh, listen, I think the fact that we had somebody saying F business that now leads us says it all.
Tells it all. Right, well, we'll get off the government before we end up on the front page of every newspaper.
And we don't,
and
the lot in Blackpool at the moment.
Exactly,
or Brighton, rather, Brighton.
Too, absolutely.
Yeah.
So tell me about, you know, when you look at, you started off a retail business, you started your career off, you've worked at Watches of Switzerland. How do you feel about young people going into retail now? Because it's a really challenging time, isn't it, to join the business?
Well, it's a great opportunity. I think retail's got a great opportunity at the moment, and if we can get this rate situation sorted out as well, I think physical retailing is now going to start going its ascendancy, and it will absolutely give online a run for its money. The costs of online are growing and growing and growing, right? and we're getting more realistic about our costs in physical. So this is a great time. If people are looking to start retail stores, this is a great time. And we just got to make sure as an industry, both landlords and shopkeepers, that we give the customer the experience that they want. And I don't want to use the word flippantly. People use this experience nonsense. And I just used it there. And I shouldn't have used it, because you can make the experience really difficult for people. You can make the experience very different for people. But people, if your brand is right and you've got something that they want, they will come and see you. And what we've got to make sure as shopkeepers, that we make it right for people to come and see us. And this going back to work that Dan spoke about earlier. I mean, God, I am putting a lot of pressure on everybody that I want people in the office. I'm not saying it has to be 5 days a week, but I do want people in the office, because how am I going to bring on my next generation if they haven't got somebody to learn from? I mean, it's ridiculous. We've had the benefit of it, and especially the middle managements and directors. We've got these big sprawling houses with lovely gardens and studies to work from. These kids are working from their bedroom in shared houses at the end of their bed. It's mentally not correct.
No.
And doesn't work. We have to get them back in the office, and employers will find that young people will not want to work for organizations that says just work from home. They'll want to get back out there, back to be able to integrate and socialize with their colleagues and learn. So I think that's an important factor. And that then takes us to where we are, with people getting back to their lives of going to shopping centers, going to the high street, and enjoying the experience of their day-to-day interaction with human beings.
Yeah, because retail's a very exciting industry, whether in the property side, whether you work in the stores, whether you work in a distribution centre. Do you think that, a lot of the headlines we read about retailers survive or die, who will thrive? Isn't it just about us all getting through and looking back in Britain and thinking, this is a great industry to be in?
Well, the Travelator stopped. The Travelator got accelerated by that we all went on as retailers looking for the end goal, how we're going to end up, how we're going to look when we start taking into account the changes in retail habits. Well, it stopped. We're all off it. We're through to the other side now. We have arrived, guys. We have arrived. We now understand where we are. And now we've got to make sure that the world that we create, the retail world that we create, is right for the 21st century and going forward. That also requires our politicians to get sensible as well.
Yeah, I think you're right there. And when you kind of look forward in your business at what those changes will be, it's always difficult to predict what's going to happen. But what do you think the next big change in retail is going to be in terms of the way consumers are now in control? It would appear from Dan's slide. Do you think that's true, that consumers have got the power and the retailers have lost that power?
I don't think so. I think we are just interacting in many, many different ways, and this hybrid retailing has got to be the way forward. The fact that we're a bit more relaxed, the fact that people are happy to go to shopping centres and work and have a coffee, or in a coffee shop and do a few hours work, or do whatever they're going to do, and that we can merge our lives together in that whole day-to-day experience of shopping, living, socialising, hospitality. That's all now merging. But the biggest thing is technology. We have to accept technology is here to stay. Mm-hmm. And more and more people have got used to it. The thought of seeing grey-haired people going to a pub and scanning a QR code on the table, putting their glasses on and looking at their phones, but they were doing it. Needs must. So they're used to it. Technology is changing the way our habits are transforming. And before, it was very difficult to change. Dan spoke about it earlier. The older population stuck in their ways, but no more. It's a lot easier now for habits to change. And promiscuous shoppers are here to stay.
Yeah, so loyalty's dead then, you think?
Well, loyalty's dead unless you buy it. And a lot of people are doing that, and that's also the right thing to do. Let's give them a sense of belonging. And there's a cost to us to do that. There's a cost to attract people. And that's going to be done in partnership, and with shopkeepers, property owners, shopping centre owners. This loyalty thing is going to be an important factor.
Yeah. And do you think that that kind of principle of partnership that you've described through this conversation has got to grow to make retail work better? So shopping centres where perhaps people have been in competition with one another, do you think some of those things have got to be dropped to be in partnership, or do you think you can still have great, healthy competition?
No, friendly competition is here to stay. It should always be, because at the end of the day, if you haven't got competition, you become lax, you don't become efficient. And, you know, and that's a downward spiral. But what I've noticed, certainly, and it's taken COVID to do this, but the interaction between property owners, shopping centre owners, and the tenant and retailer now has got a lot closer. The understanding's a lot better. And I can definitely see a positive way forward for both our brands and also for the owners of the shopping centres.
So feeling positive?
I feel incredibly positive. And just apart from central London and the city, which has been absolutely shit, no other word to describe it, it's been awful. You know, we've got quite a few shops in the city and West End, and it's been very, very poor. Apart from that, we have seen a great uptake in our clients. And when we talk about shopping centres, what's been interesting is whilst footfall is still down, it has been increasing, and the average transaction has been going up as well. So that's helped tremendously.
Yeah.
So it shows that there's still the appetite for people to come out and interact.
Theo, we're going to get kicked off, so I'd like
Probably.
to say thank you very much, Theo Fetis, for everything you had to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to invite now to join me on stage Rebecca Morton, who's here from the Loan Design Company. She's going to tell us a little bit about her business and about how younger shoppers are behaving in a post-COVID world.
Hi everyone. Firstly, thanks for having me here today. It's very exciting. First time I've been involved with Revo, so it's quite exciting, but we work a lot in the property sector. So Loan Design Club, we're an omni-channel retail platform. We're just over 3 years old now, and we really focus on new retail. For us, it's about bringing together the best of physical and the best of digital retail. We work with independent and sustainable brands of the future, and essentially our mission is to connect them with conscious global shoppers. Basically, the way I got into this, I had my own brand a few years ago and went down the traditional route, selling to bigger multi-brand stores, and just realized the challenges facing new brands on breaking into the market and actually connecting with those customers. And after that, I started hosting pop-up stores, bringing 20, 30 brands together, collaborating with landlords on using underutilized retail spaces and essentially harnessing that united reach that all these D2C young brands have. You know, massive Instagram followings are everything. It's gold. And if you can get 30 of those brands in a room, they're all promoting, all marketing, the reach is just insane. You can create any location, any venue can be suddenly buzzing and exciting and vibrant. And that was kind of in 2016 now. And now we incorporated in 2018, and now it's been, it's been 3 years of essentially just building out this new lean and agile retail concept. We host kind of 2 to 3 pop-up stores a month. We only pop up. We're in London, the UK, predominantly, but also Italy pre-COVID and China. And for us, it's really about just reshaping retail. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hopefully that's okay.
Great. So a lot of the people that shop with you are a younger breed of shopper.
Yes.
And there's certainly, we saw on some of Dan's slides, didn't we, about the kind of conscious shopper,
Yeah.
sustainability. Do you think that's a flash in the pan, or do you think it's here to stay?
It's 100%. It's 100% here to stay. I mean, sustainability is going to be the norm. I think during the pandemic, it was an 84% rise in searches for sustainable fashion. This is just continuing and won't stop. I mean, I think the big thing is the fashion industry contributes so much to the crisis that we're in, and without a doubt, it has to change. All businesses have to rethink and restructure their supply chains and the way they're doing business. For us, it's interesting because of the time and essentially being an early adopter when it comes to sustainability, it means we can work with the brands that will be the next generation, or the brands that are here to stay. I think it's much harder for much larger businesses to suddenly, be able to restructure and really focus on sustainability. So, but I think all in all, I mean, the customers that we certainly see, they're coming to us because they want to know that by buying something, they're doing good in some way for people and planet. And I think this idea of fast fashion throwaway culture is gone.
And do you think the brands that work with you, some of them do have retail outlets, some of them don't? Do you think that there is a real change in the way that they see retailing? You talked about Instagram there and about how many followers they've got and how they use Instagram as a buying tool. Do you think they're rejecting the old principles of retail?
No, not at all. I think what everyone's realizing is the importance of physical and digital working together. It's pre-COVID, we were very much 80% physical, if not more. With COVID, we were able to pivot digitally and, kind of increased our online sales by about 212%, which was great. But even now coming out of COVID, the necessity for physical and digital to be seamlessly integrated is just absolutely key. And I think if we look to some of the businesses soon to IPO or what's going on in the US, Warby Parker, Glossier, all of their plans involve rolling out physical stores. And these brands that are D2C, these are brands that started out only focusing on online. And I think what we've really seen across the pandemic is online is an absolutely crucial part of that customer relationship and journey. But the physical is about experience, community, and storytelling. And that is such an important part of brand building and customer retention. I think the big shift will be where a store's positioned. Central locations. Pre-COVID were very much about tourism. It's really going to be about understanding your customer and looking at hyper-local locations, looking at more agile retail, pop-up stores or activations, looking at different ways of using retail spaces than we did pre-COVID.
And you've got 2 pop-up stores at the moment in London to support London Fashion Week. Yeah. Are you finding that people are coming back into those? Have you been busy or have you been surprised by the people that have come back to those stores? Yeah,
definitely. I think on the whole, the past 3 months have been really interesting. And I think it kind of was touched on earlier. Patterns that we had pre-COVID are gone. And that's the most interesting thing that we're seeing is it's a very new customer behavior. I think the biggest challenge is the customer is still figuring out what they want from their retail experience, how they want to shop online, how they want to shop offline. And we're in this really incredible period of opportunity where as a retailer and as a customer, we can really work out what that relationship looks like. In terms of the stores we've had, it's been amazing to be back. It's been weird. We've had some days that are amazingly insane. Usually if we have an event or we have some kind of draw or activation, which has always done well for us, about 80% of new customers for Loan Design Club come because they've either signed up to an event or attended an event. So events and activations within pop-ups and within physical are absolutely key for our business to drive that initial engagement. But yeah, it's been amazing. It's been fascinating. We're currently in Longacre in Covent Garden and also in Westfield, Stratford, which is the second time we've worked with a shopping centre. And I think the most interesting thing has been core customers, so excited to be able to come back, speak and interact with our staff again, meet the designers, and we've had some really beautiful comments and testimonials. I think there's been a real demand for just getting back face to face and having a bit of that just relationship building again, which we've missed.
And do you think the landlords are more interested in brands like yours going into these spaces? Have you been approached by landlords to do that? Do you feel there's more opportunity for you to run pop-ups and experiential spaces than ever before?
Yeah, 100%. We work with a lot of landlords. It's amazing. It's definitely a win-win. For us, it's being able to put these incredible brands that will be the future, that are have incredible sustainable practices and are really trying to do good in front of the right customers. And for a landlord, they know that they're going to get a buzzy store, they're going to get events, vibrance, they're going to get community building, they're going to get people, because we're, like I said earlier, all the brands involved, everyone there is really marketing and pushing people into that location. So it's definitely a win-win.
Yeah. And do you think some of your vendors that sell with you, they've made different life choices to sell some of these products and become makers? Do you think the way that they're changing their lives, so we've talked about how people are living their lives, working where they're choosing to be, it's a much more hyper-local approach than perhaps you've seen before?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's where it gets interesting, and one of the things that we're working out or looking towards. It's also something that I think is still very much in flux. Central locations for us have always very much been about tourists. Tourists are one of your best customers. There's money burning a hole in their pocket. They want that experience. They want to connect. They want to spend, and they want to take it home. So for us, it's been really interesting understanding where central locations, what part that has to play in our physical kind of rollouts. Hyperlocal 100% has been a great way to do this. Essentially looking at where our customers are, and that's where the digital becomes really key, because we can understand ordering, we can understand that demographic, we can understand where they are, and we can position stores and curate brands based on those areas. For instance, in London, hyperlocal, St John's Wood, or different smaller locations that we can be really targeted and niche about how we interact with that customer.
Okay. And finally, feeling positive about the future as we come out of this pandemic world?
Yeah, 100%. I think for businesses like us, we're 3.5 years old. It was pretty crazy going into COVID. March last year, I think I got off the plane on the Sunday before Milan went into lockdown, and we'd luckily just come out. And I think the first thing that went through my mind was, thank God we don't have permanent locations in these other cities, because that would have been a nightmare. But it was crazy just suddenly pivoting digital. I think this past year has given all of us an opportunity to really look at our digital channels, which were just not where they should have been, and to be able to build businesses stronger that are, I guess, looking a bit more at how physical and digital really integrate, looking at how we're communicating with our customers and asking them what they want. For us, it's been great, like we touched on landlord relationships. It's really positioned us at the forefront of retail's revolution, which has been absolutely amazing.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Thank you very much. Thanks, that was really interesting, wasn't it, about the challenges of the new retail frontier. Now, finally, last but certainly not least, I'd like to ask Richard Morris to join me on the stage. Richard is the CEO of IWG, who enable people and business to work where, when, and how they want. So perhaps we better ask him where, when, and how that is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice
You all right?
to meet you. Hi,
Nice to see you.
Hi. Thank you for joining me up on the stage.
My pleasure.
So, Richard, you've heard Rebecca, you've heard Theo, and obviously you've heard Dan. Tell us from your perspective what the last 12 to 18 months has really been like.
A challenge for everybody, of course. We provide flexible workspace all around the world. In the UK, we do that across a network of 350 locations in 100 towns. And working from home rules doesn't particularly fit well with our business model, but as we emerge from the worst of the pandemic, what we're working on now as a business is really harnessing the fundamental impact that the pandemic has had on how and where people work. So, we're very much focused on putting the last 12, 18 months behind us and harnessing the opportunity in partnership with property owners to really provide this infrastructure that companies and their workers will increasingly look to use in order to work in a more convenient, productive way.
But tough times. Dan talked about the return to office rhetoric, I noticed before. Theo talked about he wants everybody back because he wants the younger people to learn from the older people in the workforce. What are you hearing from people who are employers? What are you hearing in your day-to-day life?
It's a great question, and my view on this is I'm hearing everything, everything in between opposite extremes. And I think that just points to the fact that there is no consensus. And what we've learned over the last year and a half is that different people have different preferences. Always did have, except that employers maybe were a little bit inclined to try and structure the physical organization of work in a fairly traditional, conventional way. Within any company, within any workforce, you'll find individuals doing the same job, but have a very different preference about the degree of flexibility they would like, how often they want to work from home, how often they would like to be in the office. And some of that is linked to age, for sure, because, of course, the younger somebody is, the more likely it is that they will benefit from a professional workplace. Some of it is to do with childcare responsibilities, everything. So we're not seeing a consensus emerge, other than the companies that will do best with regard to very successful employee engagement, attracting the best talent, are ones that embrace flexibility and ones that get creative and imaginative about where work gets done. So what does that mean in practical terms? Well, we're seeing large office using businesses downsize their footprint, getting out of leases, either through expiry or breaks. They will have much smaller central HQs, and typically they will allow their people to work from home once, maybe twice a week as a kind of a fixed arrangement, and then give them flexibility beyond that around working nearer to home. So I think this is a key trend that we expect to grow, working nearer to home, where people live, in the suburbs, not so much in the city centres in the future. We'll see much greater office worker footfall in commuter towns, in all of the places that many people in this room probably live. And that big shift to working near to home is something that we believe will gather momentum in the next few years.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? That more hyper-local approach, not going as far so that you get a bit of life-work balance back. Everybody's is different, of course. I mean, I'm delighted to hear that you've got flat vowels like me, so let's just talk about levelling up for a minute, because I think some of these people in this room perhaps aren't aware of how important the levelling up agenda is if you come from north of about Nottingham, I would say. Are you seeing any trends in terms of, we've heard about lots of people moving out of London to find gold in the Yorkshire Hills. It looks to me as though the property price in Yorkshire have rocketed as somebody who lives there. You know, are you starting to see that in terms of how organisations are thinking about the world of work? And what does that levelling up agenda look like for a business like yours?
Well, I think I'm from far further north than Nottingham, by the way,
yes.
about 200 miles north of Nottingham. What I would say is that it's early days. There's no question that hybrid working, this idea that people are given more choice about from where they work, has within it inherently massive potential to allow companies to hire from a broader geographical pool. So that means that I think inevitably it'll take a number of years to play out, but previously where certain types of role in certain types of business might have had an explicit requirement for the role to be based perhaps in a given city, we expect that there'll be much more flexibility around where employers search for people, and that will help distribute the economic growth and the recovery of the economy, hopefully distribute it more evenly over the UK. And the way that we're responding to that is building out our national network of on-demand flexible workspace locations and focusing specifically on parts of the UK that we can see are going to be underserved by high-quality, professional, easy-to-access workspace. And they are the towns that maybe have 30, 50,000 population, that if you go to them, you can see a real lack, a real paucity of high-quality workspace. And the way that we're developing our business in that regard is through our franchising program. So we now have almost 20 franchisee partners focused on developing small networks around the local area that they are from, places like East Anglia and Cumbria and Yorkshire. And those franchisee partners will open up branded IWG workplaces over the next 3 to 4 years. So that's a way in which we're accelerating the coverage of our national network into these smaller and medium-sized towns to fulfill what we expect will be growing demand off the back of people being given more choice and flexibility around where they can work.
So I work in the centre of Leeds. It looks to me like every other office is up for rent at the moment. It's up for its lease to be changed. What are we going to do with all this empty space? Because there's an awful lot of space that isn't fit for the new purpose. So what are we going to do with all of that?
high quality office space as it exists today, I think will be fine. I think it'll get used in different ways by businesses. It'll get fitted out differently. It will become deliberately designed to support more collaborative type working. Lower quality office space, I think there's going to be a lot of head scratching and sort of hard decision making ahead in relation to what you do with lower quality office space. If it's in a great location, obviously there's a number of things you can do with it, whether you refurbish it or you can convert it in some way. But generally speaking, the good quality office stock, where it exists, will have a bright future just being used and designed and fitted out in a different way. That's what I would suggest.
Okay, because I still think when you talk to people, there's a lack of appetite to go back to the office 5 days a week. And I know we talked about there are people that don't just work in offices. Do you think that we still need to rethink some of our town centres up and down the country in terms of that percentage of what was big office blocks into more living space?
Possibly. I mean, that's very much a kind of dependent on what the balance is between supply and demand for good quality living space. We well-documented issues with shortages in the south of England. I think from our point of view, there's a massive opportunity to look at the high street, look at shopping areas, whether in larger towns or smaller towns, and think about all of these shifts that are driven, whether it's by e-commerce or digitalization of work. The fact that people will work nearer to home means that one area of potential growth from our point of view is to work with retail property owners to convert retail space into workspace. Because again, I think having good quality workspace near to where people live is something that will be in demand, in increasing demand, and we can see good opportunities where we've got some exciting things to be announced in the next 4 to 6 weeks, which involve turning very prominent high street retail locations into high quality workplace locations that can be used on demand with a membership subscription, rent offices by the hour. But the key thing there is that it's feeding into the fact that people don't want to commute so long or so regularly anymore. People want high quality workspace near to where they live. And in a lot of these towns that now have surplus retail space, there is a structural lack of high quality office space. So, we look forward to being able to work closely with retail property owners in the coming months to see what opportunities there exist to repurpose surplus retail space.
So an exciting time ahead.
Very much so.
Richard, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.